Stop scrolling. This is the story they don't want you to hear. The kind that flips power on its head and exposes how fast assumptions can turn deadly. And before you blink past it, hit subscribe right now because stories like this, raw, shocking, and unforgettable, are exactly what we bring every single time. The sirens cut through the late afternoon heat like a blade, sharp and impatient, echoing off the glass towers of downtown Phoenix as Officer Daniel Reeves eased his cruiser behind the obsidian black luxury sedan gliding through traffic with quiet arrogance. The kind of car that whispered money, power, and secrets, and Daniel's eyes narrowed because in his 7 years on the force he had learned one hard rule. Nothing that perfect ever passed through his city without a reason. The plate checked out clean, no warrants, no flags, but the driver didn't fit the picture that had formed in Daniel's mind. A tall black man with close-cropped hair, posture straight as a ruler, hands resting calmly at 10 and 2 like he'd been taught discipline long before a driving instructor ever got to him. And Daniel told himself it was just a routine stop, just curiosity, just doing his job. Yet his pulse quickened as he hit the lights and the sedan rolled smoothly to the curb without hesitation. No sudden moves, no panic, just compliance so precise it almost felt rehearsed. Daniel stepped out, one hand resting near his holster, the sun flashing off his badge, and approached the driver's side window as it slid down to reveal a face carved from composure, eyes dark, steady, unreadable, the kind of eyes that didn't dart or plead or challenge. They simply observed, and Daniel launched into the script he'd memorized since the academy, asking for license and registration, explaining the stop with a vague mention of a traffic concern that even he knew was thin, and the man nodded once, slowly, producing his documents with movements so controlled they seemed ceremonial. The name read Colonel Marcus Elijah Kane, and Daniel almost scoffed internally because people lied about titles all the time. But then he noticed the way Marcus said nothing, offered no defense, no irritation, just waited, and that silence unnerved Daniel more than anger ever could. Dispatch crackled in his ear as he walked back to the cruiser, running the name again, and that was when the air shifted, when the voice on the other end paused too long before responding, when the casual tone dropped into something tight and cautious, asking Daniel to stand by, to repeat the name, to confirm spelling, and Daniel felt a bead of sweat trace down his spine because in police work hesitation from dispatch was never a good sign. Minutes stretched, traffic whispered past, and when the response finally came it wasn't a simple confirmation but a string of clipped instructions. Maintain distance, do not escalate, supervisor en route, and Daniel's mouth went dry as he glanced back at the man in the sedan who hadn't moved an inch, who sat like time itself answered to him. Memories surfaced of training videos about undercover operations, federal assets, high-risk individuals, but nothing prepared Daniel for the next transmission when dispatch said, almost in a whisper, "Officer Reeves, the individual you've stopped is a classified military asset, rank colonel, current status active, clearance level red." And Daniel laughed once in disbelief because it sounded like a bad movie, except his supervisor's voice cut in immediately, sharp and urgent, ordering him to disengage protocol, and that word, disengage, hit Daniel harder than any command he'd heard before. Still, procedure drilled into him refused to let go, and he returned to the car, trying to keep his voice steady as he addressed Marcus, who looked up at him with a gaze that held no triumph, no fear, only patience, and said quietly, "Officer, if you'd like, you may step back now." Not as a threat, not as a plea, but as a statement of fact, and Daniel bristled, pride flaring, asking what exactly a colonel was doing driving alone through his city in a car worth more than Daniel's house. And Marcus sighed softly, the first sign of emotion, and replied, "Ensuring something far worse than this conversation doesn't happen tonight." Before Daniel could press further, unmarked SUVs appeared as if summoned by thought alone, sliding into place with surgical precision. Men in plain clothes stepping out with eyes that scanned everything, hands never far from concealed weapons, and suddenly Daniel understood that he was no longer the authority on this stretch of asphalt. A woman approached, flashing credentials Daniel had never seen, speaking to him in low tones about national security, about threats neutralized before the public ever knew they existed, about Colonel Kane being the architect behind operations that dismantled entire terror networks without firing a single public shot. And Daniel's worldview cracked as he realized the most dangerous man wasn't dangerous because he sought chaos, but because he controlled it, because he made decisions that saved cities while erasing himself from headlines. Marcus stepped out of the car then, tall and commanding without effort, and for a moment Daniel saw not a suspect but a soldier who had carried the weight of impossible choices. And Marcus looked at Daniel and said, "You did your job. Assumptions are human. What matters is what you do when truth shows up." And that sentence lodged itself in Daniel's chest like a splinter. The SUVs departed as quietly as they'd arrived. Marcus drove off without another word, and the street returned to normal, but Daniel never did, because in the days that followed fragments of the encounter haunted him, the way fear had crept in uninvited, the way authority had slipped through his fingers, the way a man he'd reduced to a stereotype had turned out to be a guardian, operating in shadows. And when Daniel requested a transfer weeks later, his captain asked why, and Daniel said he needed to relearn how to see people, not profiles. Months passed, protests flared nationwide, debates raged on screens, and one night Daniel found himself working crowd control when a familiar voice spoke behind him, calm and steady. "Hard nights don't get easier, Officer Reeves, but they do get clearer." And Daniel turned to see Marcus in plain clothes. No convoy this time, just a man watching his country wrestle with itself. And they stood there as chance echoed, two men from different worlds connected by one moment on a sunlit street. And Daniel realized the real twist wasn't that the man in the luxury car was a colonel or that he was dangerous. It was that power, true power, didn't need to announce itself, didn't need permission, and didn't look the way he'd been taught to expect. And that lesson followed Daniel for the rest of his career, a quiet reminder every time he reached for his lights that the story you think you're stopping might be nothing like the truth barreling toward you at full speed.